Good evening. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. The lecture is entitled Smolensk 10-4-10, and this is a lecture which captures what the situation is at present regarding the air crash in which President Lech Kaczynski died on the 10th of April 2010. After the crash occurred, there was a report issued by the Russian authorities, the MAK Report, and it stated that the crash was a result of pilot's error of attempting to land the plane in fog against the advice of the air controllers at Smolensk. This report has been accepted by the entire world, apart from the, one might say, the right-wing Poles in Poland, and also some of the Free Polish outside Poland. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, Smolensk happened precisely the way the Russians stated it. However, with now the invasion of Russia, by Russia of Ukraine, we have an opportunity perhaps to reappraise this. Actually, the two reports which contradict the Russian report have been out for some time. Let us deal with the official Polish report. The first problem about the Polish report is it doesn't really exist. What has happened is that Antoni Macierewicz, who was the minister in charge of the investigations, has, as a result of those investigations, which include a great many Polish academics as well as experts in this field, have concluded that the plane was not in fact crashed as a result of pilot error, but blew up, and that this was caused by the Russians. The report, insofar as one may call it a report, will in fact be tomorrow, that is to say on Monday, formally presented by the President of Poland. That is to say, he will state the general conclusions, which are that the President's plane at Smolensk was destroyed by a bomb. The other report is less well known. The reason is quite simple. I am the author, and here in Great Britain, I have presented a separate report. I've written a book on it. However, the report itself was presented at the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament, and there the report was presented in a conference. In fact, there were two conferences, and subsequently the proceedings were sent to the all-party group on Poland, that's the all-party parliamentary group, and also to some members of parliament interested in Russia, as well as to the Estonian embassy, and in fact subsequently by Lord Tebbit, who was a very interested party in this. It was presented to the British government as well, who discussed it. However, at present, the British government have taken no further action and have expressed no interest in doing so. All this is reminiscent, of course, of what happened nearby in Katyn. There, the Polish intelligentsia, who made up the Polish officer corps, many of them, about 20,000, eventually were murdered by the Russians, and Katyn was one of the main places where they were first shot and subsequently buried in mass pits. It was as a result of going to the 70th anniversary of this somewhat grisly act that President Lech Kaczynski went to Smolensk, and therefore he had to go in many ways, and so the criticism of him that it was impossible, that he should not have gone, unfortunately it was impossible for him not to go, owing to the fact that his political rival, Premier Tusk, had gone at the invitation of the Russians, and therefore President Lech Kaczynski, who identifies strongly with the people who opposed Russian rule, he felt quite rightly he had to go. Unfortunately, this ended, of course, in the tragedy we all know, where everyone on board died. This third report was actually published as a book in 2015, and the subsequent report on its basis was written in 2017. However, it has not yet been published, although I intend to do so shortly. In this, the point is, and this is completely different, therefore, to the official Polish report, as I say, when I call it that, in that it agrees with this official Polish report insofar as it was an explosion. However, it does not agree in the slightest with anything else. Therefore, starting with the Russian explanation, the plane was off course owing to the fact that it was badly piloted. I'm including here the whole cabin crew, not just necessarily the pilot. Crashed into a birch tree, and as a result was badly damaged and could not ascend, and then crashed before the runway to the southeast. Everybody on board died. The official Polish report does not assert that the plane hit a birch, but was some 20 meters in the air instead of 5 meters in the air. And at 20 meters in the air, it lost its wingtips through some sort of explosion and then crashed in the same place where there was a bomb, and it was the bomb which killed everybody on board. In direct comparison to these 2 points is this third report, of which I am the author. Here, what I state is, on the basis of pure Russian evidence, not making use of any Polish evidence, and therefore making use of the public facts which the world agrees, along with Russia, are therefore agreed facts, I arrive at a totally different conclusion. The reason why I do so is because it is possible, by means of physics and aerodynamics, of course, to criticize the Russian report. And as a result, there are so many difficulties with it that the explanation preferred by the Russians, and incidentally by the official Polish report, no longer make any sense. There are 40 such points, but we are going to consider in this lecture only 3 of them. Let us take the very first point. This is the one with which I agree with the Polish report by under the leadership of Antoni Macierewicz and, of course, the Polish professors, about everybody dying on board as a bomb. However, what they say is there is evidence that it is a bomb. They point out to the fact that the people died, that they were as a result of injuries. However, what I say is the exact opposite. There was a bomb because it is impossible for the plane, already at a low speed, hitting mud, and I'm quoting, please note, the Russian official MAK report. It is impossible for a plane from such a low speed and low altitude to crash and kill everybody on board. It was a Tupolev. It was built very solidly because, on balance, Russian engineered articles tend to be over-engineered from a Western view, let alone a Japanese view, which is very skimpy with its use of materials. And as a result, these planes were very solid. It is simply impossible for such a plane to have hit the ground and killed everybody. It therefore follows that the explanation offered by the Russians is incompatible with this evidence. And as I've stated, there are many other reasons which we're not going to go into in this lecture, which support this. Therefore, it follows that this criticism of the Russians, as I've stated, is more or less the exact opposite of how the Poles have gone about it. What the Poles have stated is, they assert they have found evidence for the bomb. What I assert is that the evidence disproves the Russian thesis and therefore cannot be the truth. Instead of that, it must be asserted that the bomb killing everybody on board is the simplest explanation of why everybody died. In short, I am preferring a philosophical explanation on the basis of Occam's razor, that we should choose the simplest explanation compatible with the facts. And the facts are Russian facts, because the speed at which the aircraft hit the ground and the height at which it was traveling are indeed compatible with the Russian facts. I do not dispute the facts. I point out that their explanation of the facts, their analysis of the facts, is incompatible with the facts. Therefore, another explanation must be sought. And the only other explanation, and the one that fits, is that it was a bomb. The Poles themselves have suggested it's a thermobaric device. I make no comment one way or the other. This is to do with the military side, which is actually although fascinating in its own right, irrelevant for the argument stated. The second reason is actually an aerodynamic one. If you plot out the flight path, and so far as I know, I am the first to do so properly, you'll discover something very strange. The Russian flight path, and please remember the official Polish flight path is the same one, only higher up to start off with, is at 20 meters instead of 5. What will happen then is you'll come across the fact the plane flies more or less straight. It hits that other poplar and slices it. The Russians assert that what happened was that the plane was by that time tilting over and hence cut the poplar at an angle. You'll then discover something strange. In order to make sense of where it landed up, it had to have had swerved across Kutosov Road. But a big aeroplane, and the Tupolev was a big aeroplane, 76 tons, can't do that. This is an aerodynamic one, which pilots will obviously also understand. A big aeroplane is like a supertanker. A supertanker, as is well known, takes a quarter of a mile to turn, whereas a small motorboat can more or less turn on a dime. And therefore it follows that the flight path offered by the Russians cannot be true, because the swerve across Kutosov Road is impossible for such an aircraft. There are also minor ones, as I've said before. If you look at the times where the airplane was supposed to be, you do arrive at some strange discrepancies in the sense the plane is flying below its stall speed and so on. However, the most important and the most obvious one hinges on the flight path. It is impossible. The Russian flight path and the Polish one, incidentally, are impossible flight paths. So where was the aeroplane according to this third report? The airplane was on the flight path it was supposed to be. In short, and this is the third explanation, if we put it there, we'll begin to see another part of the jigsaw make sense. And now we turn to the third point. This is really to do with physics. If the plane lost its wing as a result of hitting a birch, and in engineering terms, this is one of the reasons 40 reasons I've mentioned, which is as nonsense, since no birch, however strong, can cut through a wing which is several meters in length and made of metal. If the wing really did come off there, then there we have a problem. Somehow at 5 meters from the ground, having hit a birch, it flew 111 meters on and landed on the other side of the plane. Now, having hit a birch, there's no obvious reason why the wingtip, because that's what it is, would fly over to the other side of the plane. It can happen at speed. It is known that the wingtip will do several strange pirouettes, if needs be. However, 111 meters, 5 meters from the ground, having hit a birch, to land on the wrong side of the plane? Can't be. By the wrong side of the plane, I mean, if you track out the flight path, you'll discover that the wingtip landed on the right-hand side of the plane. But it was the left wingtip. I repeat, this is by no means impossible inherently were it to land on the right, having sprung out in some way, but not 111 meters, not at 5 meters. Now, again, it is very important to grasp one point. The Polish argument is that the wingtip, and this is by Professor Beninienda in America, the Polish argument is, if you make all the calculations, it can only have flown 5 to 10 meters. I am not stating this. I merely said it is impossible to have flown 111 meters. Again, my argument is completely different. My thesis differs entirely from the official Polish one. I state the Russian one is impossible, but make no statement as to how long or how far the wing would have traveled, except in the sense 111 meters is impossible. Therefore, the Russian report cannot be true on the grounds of physics. So, In this instance, what therefore is the simplest explanation? And here we must turn to a completely different approach. This actually comes from having studied how secret services carry out their operations. And one of the keys to them is that, as with a good engineering project, it must be feasible and practicable. There was no way, if there was a bomb on board, that the Russians would have known that the airplane could or hit a birch. It's not possible. How would they know that it would? It follows, therefore, they didn't. So what plan did they have? And if you work out the correct flight path, you'll see it all makes sense. You see, the flight path was always the correct one. The Poles on board, the pilots, were professional pilots. The Russians have attempted to make out that they were inexperienced in some ways. However, the fact is they were perfectly reasonable pilots, and even if you state that were reasons the Russians have for saying that some of the lightly inexperienced, it would not explain the strange events that occurred, such as hitting a birch at 5 meters. Be that as it may, it's not important to the central thesis. The simplest explanation is the plane was always on the correct flight path. Therefore, what happened? Well, it's quite simple. If you plot it out at the longitude of the birch, that is to say, when the plane was due north of the birch, on its correct flight path, a minor explosion took off parts of the left wing. The plane was then still in the air, quite substantially high, and the left wing flew the 111 meters because it was high off the ground and landed on the left side of the plane. I stress, the left wingtip landed on the left side of the plane, 100 odd meters away from when the explosion took off the wingtip. That's perfectly reasonable. It's a very simple hypothesis. It certainly fits the facts. So what did the plane do then? Well, having lost its left wingtip, it started to careen over to the left. As it moved towards the left, the pilots attempted an emergency landing. This makes sense of the flight path, makes sense of the wingtip. There is no swerve across Kutosov Road, only, if you like, a gentle curve. As the pilots attempt to make an emergency landing, the landing strip itself, or runway rather, is now impossible. However, a plane can land, albeit with difficulty and with a lot of damage, on rough ground. Much damage perhaps, but not enough to explain why the plane is in many, many pieces. In the MAK report, there are 77 pieces. This is yet another of the other 40 facts I've mentioned, apart from the 3 primary ones. It is not possible for a plane to land in mud, and I'm quoting the exact MAK report term. The Russian term is bagno, comes across as marshy as well. And it lands there, it cannot break into 77 pieces. Actually, looking at the photographs, the official photographs, not the ones, I'm talking about official photographs published by the Russians, you'll see that looking at it, it's landed into far more than 77 pieces. Even allowing for the fact that the photographs don't show them all, it's quite clear it exceeds 77. So there's a problem here that the Russians did not meticulously pick up all the pieces, as opposed to, for example, the bombing at Lockerbie, where I believe tens of thousands of pieces were found by the AAIB here in Great Britain. The missing area piece, like the cockpit is missing, it's hard to see why because it's very hardened. But the point is, the plane flight path fits, the left wingtip fits, and therefore how was the plane destroyed? Keeping in mind that all Secret Service operations must be feasible, it then follows that the plane exploded when it touched the ground. In other words, the most simple explanation is that when the wheels touched the ground, it then triggered the main thermobaric bomb. This bomb, therefore, would explain the damage, as indeed the Polish report stated, but it would have been set off by touching the ground, possibly at the furrows. There are some strange furrows just before, and it would fit this theory that the plane touches, doesn't land properly immediately, the explosion on board as it lands afterwards. Very simple explanation. And it has a whole series of advantages. Again, Occam, this is all on the basis of Occam's razor, of course. But the other simple explanations are as follows. There's this curious incident of the air traffic controller, and I'm quoting Sherlock Holmes, of course. The most interesting about the air traffic controller was he said nothing to the pilots. He therefore, it's as if he deliberately led them to their deaths. And indeed, the Poles have accused the air traffic controller of failing to do his duty. But if you accept the third report, my report, then it's quite clear the reason why he did not tell the Poles they were off course is because they were not off course. And they were on course, hence he didn't say anything about them being off course. And this has yet another advantage, which is by no means obvious to people who have not studied Secret Service operations. In order to carry out deliberate murder, not everybody is set up psychologically to do this. It is by no means as easy to find people to carry out atrocities as might be imagined. A further aspect to this is that it would mean taking somebody, an air traffic control in this case, but equally, for example, a medical physician would have the same problem, who is used to saving lives and turning him into a murderer, which is quite possible if he's been trained, but their operation can only roughly have been conceived or started in February, because up to February, the Russians were adamant that President Kaczynski could not land in Russia for the Katyn celebrations. Suddenly, they changed their minds, but that's a very short period to teach people, especially an air traffic controller, to get it right. It would therefore follow that the simplest explanation is that he had no qualms about what he was doing and did his job perfectly professionally, and therefore was not misleading the plane, but the plane was on the right course. So, having said all this, we must now think about today, which is the 12th anniversary. And in this anniversary, we must point out what are the likely consequences of today's meeting. I would hope that the world itself would now, as a result of this third report, reappraise the Smolensk Air Crash. And it is important in view of the fact the Russians invaded Ukraine, as I said before, but for one other reason. Kaczynski had a plan for a confederation of Eastern European states. As Putin was presumably planning to make an attack sooner or later upon Ukraine, although the Baltic states are presumably next in line, and for all we know, Poland, I would, in fact, on the basis of a totally different book, World War III, and indeed Russia and World War III, both those books, again published years ago, I anticipated after Ukraine, the Baltic states, and finally Poland would be attacked. That somebody like Kaczynski was standing in his way and had to be eliminated. Hence, the crash. The crash was very successful in this respect, and was successful in two respects. First of all, as stated, by eliminating Kaczynski, all idea of confederation of Eastern European states disappeared, and Visegrad never was much more than a set of meetings between three of the nations in Eastern Europe, whereas Kaczynski's vision was far grander, more or less encompassing from the Baltics all the way down to Georgia, I would imagine, because he actually went to Georgia. And at his funeral, the president of Georgia, one of the few people who came, because of course, Lech Kaczynski had gone there to support his country when he was under attack by the Russians. There was a second aspect of this report. Now, I have personally been to the Royal Aeronautical Society when the AAIB were there, and I did talk to several of the people there, and they said it was a bad report. It was not. It was a very good report because it has succeeded in fooling the entire world for years. It's now 12 years since that accident. And the world believes, just as strongly as before, that the pilots crashed because they were bad pilots and that therefore they disregarded the danger of fog. I would like to add two minor points here. First of all, if you remember, when the plane crashed in Smolensk, it was said to have made 4 circuits. It crashed on its 4th attempt to land. A great deal was made of this because it showed how hopeless the Poles were because they made 4 circuits before finally making a bad decision to land in fog. And indeed it would be, except for one strange point. In the MAK report, they only made 1 attempt. They never circled the airport. There were no 4 attempts. There was just 1. A flat contradiction of all the media reports given out by the Russians at the time, which were published in all the media throughout the world, which have been accepted by everybody throughout the world. But already, therefore, we have a very minor but significant problem. How did the Russians get it wrong? And the answer, of course, if you look at the 3rd report, is they never got it wrong. The PR setting up the entire operation was worked out in advance during the period from February to April. It involved Poland, unfortunately, as well, but that is a theme, a topic for another lecture. However, they worked it all out, and the deliberate lie about the 4 circuits was just that, to help fool the world. A second aspect is that I introduced myself as Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, but I feel I ought to point out that I am also a member of the Royal Historical Society, an affiliate of the Royal Aeronautical Society, a chartered engineer, and of course hold several positions in Polish Society, Secretary General of the Polish Society of Arts and Sciences Abroad, and Chairman of POSC, where this lecture is held. Therefore, when I make my criticism, it is with some sense of responsibility, with some sense of academic knowledge, because obviously whoever criticizes state reports will run into several accusations straight away. But I repeat, the Smolensk Air Crash was not an accident. It was planned by the Russian secret services, who placed the bomb in the aircraft when it was undergoing maintenance in Russia, that the explanations generated, of which the MAK report is the pinnacle, were very well done and designed to fool the world, which they did. However, the report, on the basis of its own Russian public facts, is impossible. It does not meet either biological criteria of everybody dying, or the aeronautical criteria of the swerve, or the physics criteria of how the left wingtip traveled, and therefore cannot be correct, and therefore the simplest explanation that meets the facts is the 3rd report, which states it was on the correct flight path all the time, since unfortunately the 2 of the arguments, namely the left wingtip and the swerve, also apply to the official Polish report. I would hope, therefore, as I've stated, that from now on the Smolensk aircraft becomes a matter of debate, because as a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society who was present in the first conference on Smolensk held at the Houses of Parliament, stated, the explanation I proffered as the 3rd explanation is at least as good as the MAK Report 1. Those were his very words, officially stated. Thank you. If there are any questions, please send them through, or please ask them now. Thank you very much.